is DJ Norman. I'll be one of the moderators along with Damien Ochoa today. Just a quick intro on myself. Graduated in 1993 from Cal Poly Pomona with a management and human resources major, and have been in the HR field since. And so really happy about tonight's event. This is a long time in coming. Not specific to just this event, but just the fact that we're even talking about DEI in a forum like this. This is groundbreaking for me. So wish I would have had this when I was an undergrad as a whole. And then Damien, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Damien Ochoa, and I graduated from Cal Poly in 2020. And so I'm just really excited to be able to be a moderator on this event with DJ and to really hear the experiences of our panelists, because I think it's something that more people should have exposure about. So, yeah.
Very good. And before we introduce the panelists, just a quick overview of the format for today, or tonight, I should say. So obviously we've got a panel here of DEI experts, and we've got a few questions that we'll kick off with. And so Damien will take us through those. And then we actually encourage you all to ask live questions as well after we get past the introductions, and also use the chat room to add any questions that you might want to pose to our esteemed panel today. So feel free. We love engagement. We love interaction from all of you who have joined. So that's why we're here. So with that, I want to get into just introductions. And so we'll go in alphabetical order. And so Anita, you are up. Please intro. Oh, there we go. I think you're on mute, Anita.
Shame on me for being that person. I'm so embarrassed, but that's okay. Now I broke that ice and no one else will do it. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Ortiz. I am the president and founder of a company called Inclusionista. So I do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consulting for a living. Studied politics and Russian studies in college. And I also graduated in 1993 like DJ. I wasn't going to share that, but it's a good vintage. I'm happy to be here.
And what got you into DEI?
You know what? Honestly, I saw a need and I raised my hand. I said, how can I, rather than complain about it, how can I be part of the solution? So it's something I'm extremely passionate about, primarily because I started in the entertainment industry and I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me or had similar backgrounds. So there you go.
Good. Well, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Let's go over to Ari. Ari, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, excited to be here. Hi, everyone. Ari Freeman, pronouns he, him, his. I'm also a Cal Poly alumni. Graduated in 2018 from actually Collins College of Hospitality, but got a minor in HR last minute there. And now I'm at USC in a program for a Master's of Business for Veterans at Marshall Business School. Currently, I'm working with Amazon Web Services, and I run their military recruiting efforts. So I get to hire and recruit transitioning service members and military spouses into technical and non-technical roles at AWS. And during my time at Disney and still today, very involved with DEI at large and excited to be here.
Excellent. Was there a particular point in your career that motivated you to get into DEI?
Yeah, I think you were definitely part of that, DJ. I was very fortunate to work with him under leadership at Disney. And I was part of the veteran initiative organizations and work that was happening there. That's what really pushed me down that path. But for me, the biggest part is giving back to everyone else. And be honest, as a white heterosexual male, I get to knock down a lot of doors where everyone else can be on the same playing field as I. And that's what I take the gratitude and what I'm very fortunate to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. Let's go on to Jule. Jule, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jule Gamache. I am a DEI communications manager at Disney. And I've been in that role for only a couple months now. Previously, I was in talent acquisition marketing for a long time with Disney. And I got into DEI because I became very involved in Disney's business employee resource groups, or BERGs, as the leader of our women's dimension, so women at Disney. And the more I got involved in there, the more exposure I got to DEI and partnering with all the other burgs, and it really just became my passion more than recruitment, making the experience better for the employees we already have. So that's how I ended up in DEI.
So super glad to have you here today. Thank you. All right. And fourth, we've got Regina Lawless. Would you like to intro yourself, Regina?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Regina Lawless. I work at Meta with DJ. I'm the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Instagram. And I graduated with my undergrad from Cal State Sacramento. So not Cal Poly, but still part of the state system. And my undergrad is in communication studies. And then I went on to get my master's in organization development from University of San Francisco. And I got into this work. I've been in HR my entire career. So I've touched on DEI, helping advise leaders on how to hire more diverse talent and how to help develop their careers. And then I got a chance about 6 years ago to take on a small DEI team. And that really motivated me to want to do that work full time and at scale. So I'm excited to be part of the conversation tonight.
And before I hand it over to Damien to start us off on the questions, one, just thank you again to the panelists. I mean, I know we are between you and dinner and probably about 1,000 emails that you have at work. And so we appreciate you taking this time away from your busy schedules and your families and friends. I will ask too, just on the housekeeping side, if you're on the call and you're not speaking, can you please put yourself on mute so we can make sure we can hear all the questions and the responses clearly. And with that, that's enough of the do's and don'ts. I'm going to hand it over to Damien to kick us off on our first question.
Awesome. So yeah, we can just start in the same alphabetical order. So I'll go ahead and start with two panelists. We'll do Anita and Ari, and I'll ask 2 questions, and we'll start with Anita. So can you describe DEI in 60 seconds, and what challenges are you trying to solve in the DEI space at your current employer, and what challenges do you anticipate?
Okay, so that's a lot in one breath, but that's okay. So DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for me, it's about creating space where difference is valued, where it's actually invited and welcomed. And through those differences, people can be more productive, they can be more innovative, and ultimately you're creating shared successes. So that's my 60 seconds on that. I think the second part of the question is like, what am I trying to solve? So as a consultant, I actually get to work with lots of different companies. So I have different clients, and each client I think has different needs. And that's one of the fun things for me. So I would say some of the biggest challenges are helping senior leaders have the tools to really navigate DEI conversations. I think we're at a point where most people see the value in this, but it's really about empowering them to take action, because I think conversation just isn't enough. So across the board with all of my clients, I'm trying to facilitate and empower DEI conversations that lead to action.
Awesome. I think that provides a lot of clarity for some people who, may not have, the exact definition or know what it is. So awesome. Thank you so much for that. Ari, same question. Can you describe DEI in 60 seconds, and what challenges are you trying to solve in your space at your current employer, and what challenges do you anticipate?
No, thank you, Anita. Very well summed up. So this will be fun to follow here. But I think also what's missed within the DEI space, I call is justice, right? And that's a big thing that's often there. So I kind of coined the term, as a big Star Wars and Marvel fan, Jedi, right? So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's what this really is bringing to is there's a great analogy we can share out later, but it shows a picture of everyone on a baseball field with no fence or barrier. And it's taking that barrier and systematic approach that's preventing everyone from watching at the same time. So that to me is, in 60 seconds, I describe DEI. Current challenges today in my role. So I mainly focus in the military recruiting space. As much as everyone wants to claim it, though, the military is probably the most diverse employer of all time. Which is great. So it's an easy way to funnel now on the civilian side, bringing in talent pipeline. And so what I often have to do in my space is convince the business why they want to hire someone in the military. and breaking down those barriers of, oh, they're in the military, all they do is shoot a weapon, right? Or they're only single-mindedly tracked. But actually 80% of our forces are women, right? So there's a big demographic there, as well as the military spouse community as well. And so what I'm really focused on and privileged to do is to give these service members a meaningful employment upon their separation. And that's where the biggest gap is, because right now suicide rates are very high, and a big contributor to that for the military community is lack of employment. So that is our biggest focus there at large, and just showing employers at large, small business, big business like Amazon, what a military service member or military spouse can do to benefit your team.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That sounds like a really some cause that's just bigger than just the job itself. So thank you for that. And so for these next two questions, they'll be for Jule and Regina. We'll start off with Jule. What challenges are you trying to solve in the DEI space at your current employer? And what challenges do you anticipate? And secondly, where can you see DEI having a bigger impact in our new high-tech remote workforce?
So as I said earlier, I work for Disney, which is first and foremost a storytelling company. And we know that stories are better when storytellers represent a vast plethora of experiences for the people who will hear the stories. So we have the opportunity and the responsibility to create authentic and unforgettable stories and experiences and products that are reflective of our community. So that's like an ongoing challenge that all of us on the in the DEI space at Disney are focused on. And we're all greater than a single story, and we all deserve to feel seen and heard and understood. So amplifying underrepresented voices and those stories is so critical for us at Disney. And then in, where can I see DEI having a bigger impact in the remote workforce? In my role as a comms manager supporting DEI, I'm specifically looking for new ways to make sure that our employees get to hear about and experience the different events and opportunities that we're creating for them that have to do with inclusive storytelling. So whether that's bergs coming together or events that spotlight different work going on across the company, we have the opportunity now that a lot of us are remote to be more inclusive than ever, because more people get to experience all those different events.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That seems like you guys can have a bigger reach with the technology. So that's really good to hear. And yeah, Regina, same two questions to you. What challenges are you trying to solve in your space for DEI at your current employer? And what challenges do you anticipate, in addition to where can you see DEI having a bigger impact in our new high-tech remote workforce?
Sure. So for Instagram and really Meta at large, and even broader, the tech industry in general, I think we're still trying to solve making sure that the workforce represents the consumers, the users of our products. So Instagram, for example, we are not only a global product, but we have more than 2 billion people using the platform. So we're trying to make sure that the people who actually build those products internally reflect that rich diversity of the people that use the platform. So that's something that's going to continue to be a focus for us. And then within that, I'm really working with our leadership team on how do we make sure that the folks that we bring in from non-traditional backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, that they also have an opportunity to grow their career and be in positions of power. So it's not just about bringing in different people and unique backgrounds. We want to make sure that we enable them to do the work that they're so capable of doing. So that's one, I think, ongoing long-term challenge. And then in terms of return to work, this really excites me, because I actually think that this is where DEI can really come to life more in practical terms. And what I mean by that, I think people conceptually understand the importance of having diverse people in the room and bringing more diverse talent into the company. But I think when you're at a crisis moment, which the workforce is right now, we're trying to figure out how do we move forward in a weird, like hybrid, distributed, like nobody knows when they're going back to the office. Please sign me up to go back right away. I'm bored at home. But how do you make sure that equity still is part of the employee experience? And by equity, I mean, if I choose to work from home full time, will I still have the same opportunities to grow my career? Will I still have the same visibility to senior leadership? Will I still be in touch with my colleagues? So I think this is a rich time for DEIB to join and help shape the future of the workforce for people.
100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, moving on to the next question, and we'll go with Anita and Ari. We'll start with Ari for this next one. How can students and new grads assess the DEI offerings of a potential new employer during the interview process?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that there's two sides to it. One is do your own research. Google's your best friend. And I believe it was Mark Cuban said it best when the pandemic first started, and even when the Black Lives Matter, everything was happening, right, was really look at these companies and see what they're doing beyond just changing their logos, right, and just posting sentiments. And I look at Netflix as a great example of this, where they started to bank at Black-owned local businesses, right? So Netflix is publicly saying what they're doing and literally putting their money where their mouth is, right? This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm doing it. So we'll look at those core values. And there's companies, I know Disney did this, and I know a few others, is posting out what they're doing for diversity internally and externally, right? Having these diversity, equity, and inclusion mission statements. Part of what I'm wearing today is it's our Black Employee Network with our military logo as well, right? So there's a combination at Amazon of these internal, we call them affinity groups here, right? Bergs, Business Employee Research Groups, ERGs coming together more. And you're going to see that and match that to you. But also what can you bring? I think is the other side to it as well. And the biggest thing is knowing your value and knowing your worth. And you're seeing that too in the recruiting space, the way that job postings are written, how they're going after talent, right? Attracting, especially those undergrads, the way the internship landscape has changed so much. I think it's really going to be, there's twofold. So do the research basically, but also at the same time, know your value and see where you fit within that internal moral compass on where you want to be. And regardless of what happens with the Great Resignation, you as the candidate always have the ultimate choice. Okay. I'll say it. Amazon's going to get theirs. Disney's going to get theirs. Meta's going to get theirs. You, the candidate, need to finally get yours.
No doubt. No doubt. Way to empower the, the young grads who are, out there looking for options. So I think that was a really good answer. Anita, same question to you. How can students and new grads assess the DEI offerings of a potential new employer during the interview process?
Sure. And by the way, I love that response too. And I love the collaboration of ERGs on your shirt. That's awesome, because I really like creating those points of intersection. But a couple of things I would add to what Ari shared. As you're doing your research, follow companies that you want to work with on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook. It's really helpful because you can tune in and see, okay, these are the things that they're talking about. These are the images they're showing. These are, the people they're promoting. So that's one thing. There's also some very specific websites I wanted to share if they're not already on your radar. Glassdoor, which you've probably heard of, another one. And this is a word that I have a hard time saying. So I don't know if it's comparably or comparably, but you get the point. I can put it in the chat so everyone has it. And then another one that's focused on women called Fairy God Boss. So all these sites have ratings across different things, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. The next thing I would say, on your own LinkedIn, see if you have any connections or connections once removed of people working at that organization, so you can actually talk to someone who's on the inside, and it's not necessarily like the slick and shiny thing that they're selling you, on their own website. And then finally, when you're in the interview process, ask about DEI. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed a candidate and I'm like, so do you have any questions for me? And they're like, no, not really. Always have questions. always have questions. Be prepared with 5 or 10 of them. So if things were already addressed during the interview, you still have something to go back on. And certainly you can ask them very specifically how they address DEI within their organization.
For sure. I think that's some really valuable information that you provided us with. I think that especially asking a question in the interview, I think that it's really important. I think it shows that, like you said, you look prepared as opposed to going in there and not having any questions. I think it's almost like a necessity. You should have a question every single time you interview with any employer. So thank you for that, as well as the websites. And so moving on to the next question, these will be for Regina and Jule. Regina, you can start. Well, what are some of the common DEI channels students and new grads can leverage to support their job search? I think Anita already named some, but still, do you know of any other channels or anything to help the DEI community for new students?
I think that Anita answered that so well. She named the ones that I typically like. I'm big on LinkedIn, just following different companies and their social media channels. So I don't have anything else to add. She answered it beautifully.
Yeah, I think to what you're saying, like LinkedIn is for sure one that is probably a must to have today for anyone looking for a new career. So yeah, it just adds more weight to what she said. Jule, what are some common DEI channels that new students, new grads can leverage in their job search?
Yeah, I think one thing that we haven't talked about are conferences for your industry. Anita talked about making connections with people, and Regina as well, with people who are like second tier away or people you might know. But one great way, if you don't know anyone in those companies or in your industry, is to meet them at conferences. Networking is super scary if you're an introvert, but it's so useful, and it can really help when you have all these people in your network that you've met at a conference, because a lot of times recruiters are there looking for people, or you can meet peers so that throughout your career, if they're posting about jobs at their company and you're interested in, you'll notice it on LinkedIn. Or like, there's just so many benefits to building up your network, and there's so many conferences in literally every industry. You just have to Google, insert your major, insert conference, and there's probably like a dozen. So I think that that's, like I said, it can be hard for introverts, but if you can push yourself out of your comfort zone, it really is worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think sometimes we get so used to the Zoom world and just everything being online, a conference online, but being in there in person is a total different experience, because you can't really meet people, over the online conference, whereas in person, you're almost forced to meet somebody next to you and talk to them and, get their whereabouts. So I think a conference is for sure a great way to network.
There's also a lot. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
There's also a lot of virtual conferences that have come out of the pandemic as well. So even if you aren't ready to go in person, there's a lot of platforms that they've identified that can help you still have that same connection, even if it's virtual.
100%. Thank you
Hey,
for
Damien,
that.
not to interrupt. Ari, you had your hand up. Were you going to add something to the conversation here? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I typed it in, but I got told as my master's program, it's very entrepreneurial spirit, is use the student card if you're a student, or use that, hey, you're alumni, as another connector as well. Say I'm working on a project, whatever it is. Hey, I'm doing research here, right? I get pinged that all the time on LinkedIn when I see it's a Cal Poly student or now a USC student, that's going to pop out a little bit faster for me to respond to. So while you're there, definitely leverage that as well.
Damon, I had one other thing I was going to add before we go on to the next question. Many companies have, what they call an ambassador program. I know at Meta or Facebook, we actually have something called the Meta Connections. And it's basically an opportunity for folks who are in the interviewing process to meet with people who aren't part of their interviewing panel. right? It's just someone in the organization that might be in a particular role that you're seeking to gain, or within the industry you're interested in. And many times, you can connect with someone who might look like you as well, right? So you have that connection, because a lot of the large organizations, we don't always know people there, right? You kind of might be the only person in the room. And so it kind of helps break down that. So ask if there's an ambassador type program or connections program where you can actually speak to someone from a diverse background.
Definitely. I think that's really resourceful information to apply. Yeah. So next question. This will be for Anita and Ari. We'll start with Ari. Can you share one DEI initiative you're excited about working on in 2022?
Yes. So you heard me talk about the military space and the military spouse and earlier, but what I'm excited about even further now is we're expanding to student veterans this year for the first time. And I was fortunate to have a peer in my cohort at USC get the job as well, who used to run this program for the University of Hawaii. So helping out a known veteran looking for a career pivot, which is very exciting, and something new for Amazon Web Services is having a dedicated space on that student veteran support and expanding those internship and full-time placement, which is really exciting for us, and looking forward to those opportunities in 2022.
Awesome. We love to hear that. Anita, can you share one DEI initiative you're excited about working on in 2022?
Sure. I will say that as a consultant and having clients, like, you never know what's going to come up and what the needs are. So it's slightly different than if I were in-house somewhere. But one of the things I'm really committed to, I believe we all can continually learn, no matter, where we sit or how long we've been in our particular field. So this year I'm committing to learning more about the trans and non-binary community, as well as about disability inclusion, because I think those are two dimensions of diversity that are probably not talked about enough. And there's a lot more work that all of us probably could be doing there.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And so for this last question, it'll be for Jule and Regina. We'll start with Jule. How can we incorporate more DEI incentives among employers and employees?
I think the first thing would be with transparency. So we talked about it a little bit with your job search, but the more transparent companies are with what they're actually doing in the DEI space, the more accountability we'll see, because it's out there for the world to see. And if they commit to doing this initiative this year, then the world and the stakeholders will know if they make it happen or not. And then another thing I think that I have seen some employers start doing is holding leaders accountable to the DEI activations with their compensation. And I think that that's critical if a company is committing to DEI, to making it part of what makes a leader successful in their job. And then lastly, on the compensation train, I think another key thing is we've talked about employee resource groups, and I think that there are some companies who, actually, let me step back. Employee resource groups, we've talked about a little bit, but essentially you get together in a group with people in your same dimension of diversity, or with allies. You don't have to be in the dimension to join a resource group, but essentially it's like a group that comes together and does programming for employees and helps influence the business. And all of this work is done outside of people's day-to-day responsibilities at a lot of companies. So I think one other great thing that I've seen some companies doing is compensating the leaders who are doing all this work outside of their day-to-day, because it's so important to the success of DEI, and it's above and beyond what people are getting paid for.
For sure. Great points. I think especially what you said about transparency being something, I think it's a lot easier to hold somebody accountable when they're transparent. So great points. Regina, same question. how can we incorporate more DEI incentives among employers and employees?
Yeah, I think for employers, I think one interesting trend that's starting is kind of the external forces that are trying to incent. Like you have companies like Goldman Sachs, these investment firms that are looking at making sure that companies have diversity on their board, for example. So I think there's real power, especially for publicly traded companies, to have some external pressure from investors and from their board of directors to really lean into diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think internally, in addition to what Jules was saying around holding the leaders accountable through their compensation, I think that there's also companies that are looking at how do you incent other measures like inclusion, because the challenge sometimes, or the risk in incenting on representation goals, which is like the number of diverse people you have, you start to get some behaviors around just trying to meet a quota, or just it sometimes incents managers to just hire people and then forget that they actually have to take care of them once they're hired. So I think that I really like how companies are starting to use their employee engagement or pulse surveys to measure inclusion and belonging. And I think that's more of what we need to be looking at incentives. And that's something that you can incent all level of employees, how they contribute to a culture of or a culture or a place where people feel like they're included and belong.
Great point. Great point. Thank you so much for that. So yeah,
Damon, just to
ahead,
chime in
DJ.
one more time here. We have a question in the chat room, and I was going to ask it. I believe Ari has a response, but maybe we can also open it up to the others to respond if they have a thought here. But the question is from Natalie: what kind of challenges do you face implementing DEI in large organizations? So I'll just start there.
Yeah, it's very challenging. So I'm sure you all probably heard of Amazon Web Services. When I was at Disney, there was always challenges too, right? At the large, because you're absolutely right. You're not going to get everyone on board. And for a while, there was this big thing of how do you quantify? What's the ROI? What's the data behind, right? When I was at Disney, it's just tell me the story that's going to happen here. And now that it has evolved, finally, right? We're finding ways to be able to properly track these metrics and share it across to get everyone on board. But it's still a challenge today. And the biggest thing is just remember your purpose, right? Remember what the reason is, just like with everything else, right? Your own individual career too. It's really finding that passion there and staying active on that path, but also taking that feedback along the way to learn, why is this a roadblock? And now how can I work through this roadblock to get through? So for example, an individual challenge we're facing right now is implementing our military spouses for fully remote work. And there are some businesses that are against that, but we're pushing forward with that initiative right now as our military spouse community, as they potentially are moving every 3 to 4 years, may not be able to work in an office setting every day. And even with this COVID, there's still that challenge today. So it's working through some of those hurdles.
Anyone else want to add to that? Thank you, Ari.
I can add. I guess I've worked at a few different large employers doing this work, and I think it's for sure a challenge. To Ari's point, I think one of the other challenges to bring up is that because the larger the company, the more diverse the employee population. And so you're trying to implement programs and strategies at scale that cater to or tailor to different populations in their unique circumstances. And that's really hard to get right, because when you're trying to level the playing field and meet people where they are in terms of what they need to be able to compete or have similar opportunities, it's different across communities. So sometimes the opposition comes from the underrepresented groups themselves, trying to make sure that we represent their interests. So it's just kind of an interesting dynamic and a fun challenge to work on.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I had a personal question. I guess we have some time, so I'll go with Anita and Ari for this one. But what sparked your passion for DEI? You could start, Anita.
Sure. There's two things I'll share. So first, I'm actually the daughter of a retired Navy officer. So as a kid, I moved all around the country. We lived East Coast, West Coast, Central America, South America. So growing up, I was exposed to lots of different types of people, lots of different cultures. I had to learn how to adapt to different environments. So it made me curious and flexible and resilient. So I think all of those things predispose me to working in a space like inclusion. The second thing I would say specifically, when I started at Paramount, I'll tell this as quickly as I can. So I was an assistant. I was sitting in a cubicle. I'd been there not more than a couple of months. And the Hollywood Reporter, which is the trade paper for the entertainment industry, one of the trade papers, they had a story about how each of the studios had done specific to women and people of color writing and directing movies. And our company didn't perform particularly well that year. So I was new and shiny and excited to be there. And we had a CEO who was a woman, Sherry Lansing at the time. And I'm like, we got to do something. So I wrote her a letter from my cubicle and said, I saw this. I'm so proud to work here. So of course this disappointed me. Here are some ideas I have. And the phone rang in my cubicle. I'm going to underscore in your cubicle, my cubicle, because it really shows that we all have power. And it was Sherry Lansing calling me to thank me for my letter. And she introduced me to several different people at the company that I could talk to about my ideas. Now, the truth is, the people that I talked to at that point, they weren't ready for it. They did it because she said to, but it sparked that interest in me. And I said, I'm going to keep working hard here so that I'm in a position where I can have influence. And, 10 years later, many roles later, there was an opportunity to not just work in inclusion, but lead inclusion. And because I had a track record at the organization, I was afforded the opportunity. So there you go. That was my spark.
Great story. Thank you for sharing that. Ari, same question. What was it for you that sparked your passion to get into DEI?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. If you would have met me when I first started undergrad in 2007, I was going for forensic accounting. I had no interest in DEI. Back then, I don't think it was really talked about either. And eventually my career manifested itself into HR. And that's when I got into recruitment and really saw a lens of what was going on and a place that I can advocate for other service members like myself and military spouses. And that's what really drives my passion and spark in giving these folks an opportunity where right now service members on average have 7 to 10 jobs in their first 2 years, and really finding a way to give back to that community when they make the ultimate sacrifice, but also their family as well. As I mentioned, the spouse community is often forgotten about. And it honestly started with Disney. I was part of their business employee resource group Salute. I got quickly moved into a leadership position there. I became the face of Disneyland Resort Salute as a professional recruitment coordinator under DJ's org. I wasn't very high up. I know I had plenty of calls with Jule about marketing campaigns and stuff for our roles, but the fact that I was fortunate at a big company to have a seat at the table is what really saw that my passion grew from there, which led me to where I am today. And now I'm at AWS running the entire SkillBridge program and giving back. So I would say is find that passion that you have and don't ever leave that spark. Also, I am married to someone from a Latina descent, so I get to see that side of the world too. And like I said earlier, as a white heterosexual male, I know my life and career has been privileged and that needs to stop. And so I can use my platform and my voice to bring others up with me to break down those barriers. And that's what motivates me every day.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those experiences. Jule, Regina, we have some time, so I'll ask you guys the same question. Start with you, Jule.
Yeah. So I worked in recruitment marketing for about 8 years at Disney. So working to developing marketing and communications to attract people to want to work at Disney in all different types of jobs. And I did that for a long time. But over the second half of that journey, I became more invested in our employee resource groups and making the experience better for our existing employees. And that's really kind of what piqued my interest into DEI. Being on the leadership team of women at Disney, I got a lot of exposure to the existing DEI teams and kind of learned what some of their challenges are and what they get to work on. So I made a lot of connections in those teams. And this past year, they grew the communications team they tripled in size. And because I was a communicator and I had made those connections and I was so passionate about our employee resource groups, it was like the perfect job opened up. So that's how I ended up in DEI. And I'm just so excited to continue to contribute to making life at Disney better for the people who are working there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And lastly, Regina, what has sparked your passion for DEI?
Yeah, and I'll say personally and professionally. So personally, I grew up in Northern California in a community that was underserved, racially segregated, bordered one of the most affluent zip codes in the country. So I grew up seeing firsthand inequality and wondering why that was and seeing how that played out in the opportunities that I had versus, people who lived on the other side of the kind of border. So it's something I've always been really passionate about personally. And then professionally, I started my career in HR in 2005. And as an HR partner, I was fortunate to be in the room, able to help consult and coach senior leaders. And throughout majority of my career, really, honestly, all of my career, I was almost always either the only woman in the room or the only Black person in the room. And so that's something that really, struck me as something that needed to change. And so getting into DEI, I feel so strongly about making sure that people don't have to be the only, whatever you identify as, whatever the richness that you bring, that you don't have to be the only, that we're attracting more richness and talent in our organizations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, at this moment, I guess we can open up the panel for questions and answers. So DJ, did you have anything to add?
We've got something brewing in the chat room. So let me get these questions out on the table here. Folks have been patient. Thank you for waiting. So here's the first question. So from Rebecca. First of all, she thanks you for all taking the time to do this. And second, she's looking at transitioning into a career in DEI. What steps, certifications, or ways might you share to get experience in this space? So we can kind of play ready golf on this one if anyone has suggestions of our panel members.
I can jump in, and I think Jule spoke to it a little bit, and that is, if you're at a company that has employee resource groups, that is a fantastic way to start because you'll get to know that team. In terms of your own learning, there's lots of courses on Coursera, some that you can take at no cost. There's definitely some other programs. Cornell has one that's very popular. I did one at Northwestern. They're not inexpensive. So the better route on that is if you have an employer that has some kind of tuition reimbursement program, take advantage of that. And then the other thing is, I'm a big fan of volunteering. You can build your network that way. So let's just say, and again, I'll reference conferences because Jule mentioned that. Let's say there's a DEI conference. I guarantee you, if you raise your hand and say, I'd love to volunteer to help you, organizer, put this conference on, they will say, yes, please, thank you. When can you start? And so in doing that, you have a chance, A, to network, and B, to show your interest and show what you've got. So those would be my suggestions.
I would just add from a personal story here real quick. At Disney, like I said, I took on leadership positions in their diversity group. And that's what ultimately led me to now a job in DEI fully at AWS. I was able to network while on a military deployment with someone not even looking for a job, I love what I was doing at Disney, but this opportunity came available after 6 months of conversation out of nowhere. So you also never know what that can come in terms of there. But I was able to showcase years of experience through my time in that diversity group. And then another one that did one as well was University of Southern Florida was a big DEI cert that went out last year. And they offered it for free, and I hope they do again because it was a great learning that they partnered up with a lot of high-end keynote speakers and some other celebrities talking about it in their world as well, and how much they have that platform. So yeah.
We've got another question. I want to try to get to as many of these as possible. So first, Yvette, who just took on a role within Apple as a program manager in their D&I program space. So congrats to that new role. Her question is, does the panel have any advice from going from an organization of about 500 employees to an organization the size of Apple?
I would say my piece of advice, first of all, congratulations. That sounds awesome. My advice would be to take time to get to know the organization. And I know you're going to be pressured to hit the ground running and do. And certainly you do have to do some things in your first 90 days, 6 months. Take some guidance from your manager and your team on what those critical things are. But if you're going to a large organization like Apple, I would absolutely try to understand the company and the way it operates, because I've worked at small companies. I've worked at like a 12-person nonprofit. It is night and day from like an Apple or a Meta. You're like, wait a minute, there are people to do all the things, like the 12 things I was doing myself. There are like whole teams to do all of these things. So that would be my advice, is to get to know the company.
Thank you.
I'll add one little piece to that too. As you get your footing, make sure you are in close contact with your manager around setting goals. So short-term goals, long-term goals, so that you are setting yourself up for success and being really clear what the expectations are. Because I think sometimes when people aren't successful, it's because they think they're going down the right path. And meanwhile, their manager is expecting something totally different. So to the extent that you can have really clear expectations and measurable goals, that would be what I would add.
The one thing I would add to it would be try to identify who your allies are, right? Especially within those leadership roles, folks who are already taking a big stance within the DEI space. Because many times, just having a coffee with someone who's a huge ally in some of these DEI initiatives can kind of tell you, all right, the bumps that are in the road, so they can kind of set the tone for you, but also, let you know what the greater organization's roadmap looks like, and what challenges you may face, right? So it's not so much of a shock to you when you get there, and how maybe these individuals have kind of worked through some of those challenges within the culture that you're working in, because every company is different. And so you really want to apply the right amount of pressure and positioning and so forth, and allyship based upon that culture and what the roadmap is, where it's headed.
I'll just add real quick, protect your calendar in a big tech company. I learned that very quickly going from Disney to Amazon Web Services. Block your own time. DJ taught me this in general, like block your bathroom breaks, even if you have to, or whatever you got to do, your walk time. So protect yourself, set your own personal boundaries to be successful. The space can get very draining. Obviously you're coming to a role, so I'm sure you've been in the space before, but the bigger the company, I've only worked at bigger companies, so I can't speak for smaller, but what I've seen people transition is they get wrapped up in that work so much, and they sometimes have to take care of themselves. And that's a big part of as well, bringing your best self to work, is being able to take care of yourself first.
Okay, that made me think of something else. Can I add to this?
Please do. Thank you.
Yeah, no. There's one of the things I did that was so helpful for me in terms of not so much boundaries, but about keeping motivated. I have a folder in my email box, and I just call it positivity. So when I get a message from someone that says, hey, you crushed that project, or hey, your help really allowed me to, succeed with XYZ. Like I just put them in there. And so when I do have those moments of struggle, and when you're working at a big company, I hate to tell you, you're going to have the moments of struggle. You have something to go in there and remind you of why you're doing what you're doing, and remembering, the value that you bring and your purpose. So positivity folder, I recommend it for everybody.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. We have another question from Alejandro, and the question is, what is the most important data that you use to advocate for DEI initiatives and programs? So let's get into the data, folks. We know this is important to us. Let's do it.
So I'll jump in. So Amazon Web Services is a very data centric, right? Everything's data focused on what we do. It's in our leadership principles, right? It's in everything. And so I was able to take a program when I joined in June. We had 9 hires and brought it to 40 by the end of the year. And now, like I said, we have 33 already in this cohort that started January 18th. So we're very there. And so when we talk about data, it's how do I bring those folks in? To the earlier point of allies. So in my program, I found the easy wins and the allies that are willing to take on and bring in military folks into the business. And then from there, it did what we did is like an internal broadcast of a live event and broadcasted out all of our wins to Amazon Web Services within that same job family vertical. And now I'm excited to share in a couple months, we're doing it to the whole Amazon Web Services community with some senior execs now on board because of the data I was able to capture. So really look at the individual business and what they're looking for in that specific metric, right? Metrics I'm gathering at Amazon Web Services were very different than what we did at Disney because every business has a different goal. So tie that in, be able to present it in their format, their nomenclature, their language, to have them understand how this is benefiting whatever their mission or, so forth is.
I think someone mentioned earlier, employee engagement surveys are so important when it comes to DEI data, like polling the employees to see how they're feeling about all of the initiatives that the company is doing. Is it working? Is it improving, year over year? Things like that is really helpful. And comparing that to external data to see like what's the market like right now. For example, in 2020, there was a report that came out that showed that women were being exponentially leaving the workforce more than men, especially women of color, due to the pandemic. So looking at external data like that and seeing what can we do as a company to ensure that's not happening to our employees. So I think it's balancing internal and external as well.
I'll add one little point too, and I'm a big fan of data. And DJ, when we were working together, he was such a good partner because he was all about the data. So the numbers are critical. And I would add that I love anecdotes and I love stories because they will, those of us that have an emotional side, they'll touch those heartstrings. So I think it's extra powerful when you can take the hard data and tie it with real stories of success. Because it really helps the data come to life. Sometimes data can feel abstract, but when you hear a story of like, oh, these 10 employees had this opportunity and delivered these results, like I think it can amplify the messaging.
Yeah, I would just plus one to that, Anita. I think the anecdotal or the qualitative data is super powerful. I think especially in tech companies, there tends to be a focus on data and just the quantitative data, and leaders can swirl around that and miss the bigger picture, that we still don't have the diversity that we need, and we still are not having, people are not having a positive experience in some of these communities. And so I think that helping them to see some of the stories and how people's experiences play out, and not being afraid to pilot, because I think sometimes too, with especially in larger companies or tech companies, there's such a focus on the data and the results, and sometimes you need to run some pilots, get a proof of concept before you scale. So I think using using some preliminary data would be an advice that, sometimes you need to go that route before you can prove something out and scale it.
Very insightful. Thank you. We've got another question from Kathy. And so Kathy's question is about, organizations today are faced with, supporting folks with disabilities and accessibility issues. And sometimes it's seen as separate from DEI. And so how do we strengthen the inclusion of disability and accessibility within the DEI efforts?
Well, I can speak for Disney. It's disabilities is one of our key areas of focus when it comes to DEI. So one way that we accomplish some of the things that you talked about are we have this huge cohort of people from all across the company who have either identify as disabled or are passionate about accessibility or have some ownership of a product that is really accessibility is really critical, and they all come together and meet on a monthly basis to talk about best practices and how they can, help each other improve the experience for disabled employees and consumers and like all of it. So I think being in a large company, we're really fortunate that we have all of those people who are able to come together, but it really has helped with the invisibility of disabilities in the company.
I want to actually tie it to the previous question around data. And I think using data to advocate for it. So there's an initiative, and I was just looking up actually on Instagram. Got to play. But there's an initiative called We the 15, and the concept behind it is that 15% of people globally identify as having a disability. So 15% is no small segment. Like that means that, in an office of 10 people, you have at minimum one person who identifies as having a disability. Now, whether people know that or not is a different thing, because the reality is our society has put stigma around disability in a way that we really need to tear down. So I think looking at data, making the argument, whether it's to your DEI team, whether it's to other potential allies within the organization, to say, hey, this is something that we need to focus on, and it's only going to make us stronger as a company. The valuable 500, by the way, is another one. So those are the two I would say. I'll put them in the chat.
Yeah, the only thing I would add from a disability accessibility perspective, going back to the data, and it depends upon your role and your access to this data, because we definitely, this whole idea of privacy is very key, right, when it comes to individuals. But at the end of the day, if you do have access to, or at least directional data, right, around just what is the makeup of your organization, what types of maybe, accommodations your organization typically makes for individuals like that, right? Because then you start to get to the need, right? What is the need of our organization? Who are the types of people we are bringing in, and what types of needs do they have? But again, it really depends upon your level of access to the data. Typically, that data is held fairly high in an organization. So just know that that's the case. So you may get some pushback in asking for that data. But I think even starting with, the resource groups, right? Are there resource groups, business resource groups that do focus in that area? That might be another area as well to start as a starting point.
And I want to just clarify, I'm not even suggesting, I know that data may be held closely, but I'm thinking even data that exists in terms of the disability community more broadly.
And just to add, right, you can always partner up with other business employee resource groups, right, or diversity groups within your org. I know we do a lot of that here at Amazon. It's great. There's like distribution channels, and we talk through in Slack channels. It's a great way. So Amazon uses Chime just like a Zoom, and it's closed captioning is not there. And that business diversity equity inclusion group brought that up, and they're now building that into the new platform, right? As because people are speaking up. So that's completely data, right? But anecdotal, and that storytelling, how can we build even within our own systems? How can we be more inclusive and representative of everyone?
the chat room continues to roll. So one of the points of action that we've got in the chat room is, can we create a CPP DEI support group of sorts so we can continue this conversation? I believe there was a response to that. So I don't know if Andrea, did you respond to that? I thought someone responded. Or Melissa, did you respond to that? Did you want to come off of mute?
Hi, DJ. Yes, I did respond to it. So we just launched a brand new mentor portal. It went live in November, and it's through People Grove. And we have a variety of communities. And one of the communities that we are building out is a DEI group. It already has a couple articles in there, and we're going to start populating the site with some more resources and hopefully some discussion. So I did put the link in the chat. If you're not on our mentor portal, please jump on. It's a great way to connect, and also, who doesn't want to mentor our students? So please join. Thanks.
Excellent. So this brings us to the end of our chat room, at least questions. So we'll do another request. If you all have additional questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat room. Damien, I'm not sure if we have any additional scripted questions. If so, we can do one or two more of those before we adjourn.
Actually, we went through all of them.
Through them?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so then we're going to put it back on the people, give the people what they want, right? So for all the attendees, really appreciate you joining. If you do have additional questions, you can either come off of mute and ask it verbally, or you can drop it in the chat room, whatever you're most comfortable with. We'll pause for a second here, see if anything comes in. But if not, I will hand it back to Damien to close us out. So we'll give it a second here.
I do have a quick question, because DEI was very new to JPL within, the past couple of years, and I was never familiar with, the overall concept of that either, and just kind of going in with an open mind in general, right? But also, I asked in the chat earlier, do you guys find generational, roadblocks there? Because, I have some seasoned the managers were like, why are we having listening sessions, right? Like, leave your feelings at home, leave your, drama at home. And you're just like super conflicted, because how are you supposed to feel? Like, we had listening sessions and I didn't know what that was. And I was like, I feel really bad after this. Like, I feel like I need to like go and take like 30 minutes to just, how am I supposed to feel after this? Because we're hearing people's struggles, you can't respond. And I'm very much a problem solver, where I'm like, oh, let me help you fix your problem, but it's not for that, right? It's to listen. So what kind of advice would you give, people who aren't very familiar with it, who we want to be allies, but we don't really know, the ins and outs, and even from like minority cultures or whatever, we're just like socialized to just like keep business, personal at home, and how do you integrate that in a good, positive way? So I know that's a super loaded question, but I'm gonna throw it out there because I know other people are probably thinking it.
I can jump in, or at least I'll start. Hopefully others will have something to say. I think what you're talking about is very real. It's something I definitely experienced. I will say that, having done DEI work for over a decade now, in the early days, I was having to like bang on doors and say, pay attention, please listen. Thankfully, I think now there's more people that aren't just opening the door. They're saying, hey, I really need your help and expertise. So that's a positive change. I'm not one to shame people. So if there's someone who doesn't understand it or doesn't believe it, I don't think it helps my cause if I try to, finger wag and tell them they're not thinking right. It's more about meeting people where they are. And, we all know our lived experience and we don't know someone else's. So I think it's about identifying ways to help try to learn more about the lived experiences of other people if it's not something an individual has gone through themselves. So to that, I'm actually going to share a tool. There's a facilitator who does this thing called Factuality, the game. It's an interactive, you essentially take on the identity of a person. So for example, when I when I did this for the first time, I was a Black trans woman. And then you have to navigate through different experiences and see sort of, oh, I can't do that. Or you see what all the obstacles are. So long story short, they do several public facilitations a year. I want to say it's like $25. It is so good and so valuable. And I think for people who are real baseline and don't get why this is important or feel like they don't have a role in addressing DEI, it's very, very eye-opening. So I'll put it in the chat. Those are my thoughts.
I would just add on there, factuality is powerful. We demoed that at my last company and it's really eye-opening. And in that same vein, I would add to what Anita said, that education, just exposure. There is definitely a generational piece, and there's other dynamics. I think people who just through their lived experience haven't been exposed to different people of different backgrounds. It's sometimes hard for them to wrap their minds around or put themselves in other people's shoes. So through my prior experience and to an extent currently, we try to just educate people about other people's lived experience in a comfortable, safe environment. So whether it's doing something like the factuality game, or I would do workshops with intact teams where we would have discussions, and I would do an exercise with them called Heard, Seen, Respected, where I would ask people to share in pairs a time where they didn't feel heard, seen, or respected. And that's powerful when you do it in pairs, because everybody, regardless of your, for the most part, everybody has had an experience where they didn't feel like they were seen or heard or valued or respected. So just, there's a lot of little things like that of getting people exposure and helping them learn and build some empathy around other people's experience.
Thank you.
I'll add, oh, go ahead, DJ, if you want to go.
Please go ahead, Ari.
Okay, so I'll take it from a two-side approach here. One, still in the U.S. military, career reservist here, right? The military is still very much a white heterosexual male world, so there's still a lot of changing that needs to happen. But, right, we're slowly seeing things move because there is more diversity moving into leadership. So it's definitely a generation thing. So in military is very slow to act in this space, but they're getting there. So what I would say too, right, is at some point though, within then the civilian side, right, normal employment here, how much is that company willing to bend, right? Will there eventually be leadership that changes? And there is a threshold. I had a friend that I was with, and he worked for a company, and you know he's openly gay, and that business wasn't very supportive of things. On his last day there, they took him to a strip club and did all these other things, and he's like, what is going on, right? It was even on his last day they couldn't get. He's in a much happier company now because he realized this company isn't going to represent me and understand me, right? So at a certain point that is going to change, or that company I foresee in the next decade or so will not exist with where things are going, hopefully, right? Because I think there needs to be that shift and change where now companies are also more open. Hey, we have 40%, or 50% women or diversity in leadership positions or board of positions, right? Beyond the state mandate that's happening. So I would just keep an eye on that too, to see where you're trying to get to is how can I then push that change.
Wonderful. For those of you who this is maybe your first experience in DEI, I tell you, there's some depth in this conversation. I'm looking at the chat room, the volume of resources that our 4 panel members have just, pushed out to us off the top of their heads, by the way, is incredible. And just really, really want to say thank you to all 4 of you. Appreciate you personally and professionally, and the Cal Poly family thanks you as well. So Damien or any of the other board members, anything else? I think we've reached all of the chat questions. So I'll open it back up to the board members. Any other thoughts before we close out?
Just really quick. I just really wanted to thank the volunteers for coming here and really just giving the students the opportunity to engage and learn a little bit more about diversity, equity, and inclusion from people who are in the industry. And hopefully that this was able to inform as many students as possible for the purpose of DEI and how to leverage DEI resources in their careers and different corporations. So again, thank you so much to the volunteers. I think it was really, really beneficial for everybody.
One last question before we go. And so I just want to make sure everyone is heard here. So Miss Mary Elizabeth Aguilar, do any of you have any thoughts on if they're trying to start a like a BERG or a DEI organization within their organization? Any resources you could share, Mary?
Yes, I think the first thing that's really important if you're launching a BERG or a resource group is to start with intake sessions with members of that dimension of diversity and find out what they want, what's missing from their experience, what are they looking for that this group can provide. That can really help kind of identify the purpose of that resource group. And from there, you can get going on like what type of activities will make that happen. A lot of the resource groups at Disney were all grassroots from the beginning. Someone noticed a gap and started the group. And I think that's been a hugely successful strategy in making it happen.
All right, I'm going to keep it real here. And I know a lot of us are in virtual environments, so this does not apply. When we launched our ERGs, we had food. Like food brings the people. So to the extent that you can, you know, have a budget for some food, you get them in the door, and that's where you can make your pitch and convince them. And I say it somewhat lightheartedly, but the reality is investment has to be made, whether it's a business resource group or a club. You have to have some kind of resources and budget to make it successful. And yeah, I always encourage food, and it's a great way to share culture too. Big fan of food.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that would be there's always a cross section of a company goal and a diversity goal, right? Typically, right now, I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, you should only do it because the business is going to earn money from it. However, I will say it's been an effective strategy, right? Because diversity is every facet of life. So pick one, and I guarantee you it's going to have a cross section with the organizational goals. And oftentimes that can help give you some leverage and be part of the strategy in terms of finding that funding that Anita is talking about to support that, because diversity by itself is excellent, right? But diversity funded is magnificent. So keep that in mind as we go. Any other additions to that one in terms of starting up a club? But we've heard some good examples there. All right, I'm the timekeeper today, so we're gonna do the countdown. So, 3, 2, 1, any takers going once, going twice? All right, well, I'll say the final thank you to the panelists, Anita, Ari, Regina, Jule. We appreciate you at the Cal Poly family here. We appreciate all of you who attended. Thank you for taking time out of your family and friends and dinner time to be present, to engage. And so appreciate you. We'll see you on the next event at the College of Business Alumni Board. Have a good night, everyone.